There they are, those assholes.
They've been taken. Someone was led away.
Mass mobilization has indeed begun in Russia. Videos and photos of military enlistment office raids on men are appearing more and more often online. They're being taken right from the streets and apartments, packed into minibuses and sent straight to the war. Vladimir Putin completely ignored the large-scale attack on Moscow, even though the Kremlin boasted about the excellent performance of their air defense. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones are attacking Moscow again right at this moment. The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, called for diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine, but at the same time threatened to increase the number of strikes on peaceful Ukrainian cities and threatened Europe and Ukraine with a nuclear strike if the attack on Moscow continues. Meanwhile, Ukraine and the US are holding close negotiations with the Russians about freezing the war along the current front line, while the Europeans have issued an open ultimatum to the Russians about how the war should end. Moreover, Russian officials have already started talking about this. My name is Alexei Pechi, and we will discuss all these topics together in this episode. So let's start with today's top story. Mobilization has started in Russia, and it's compulsory. In the Penza region of the Russian Federation, raids have begun involving military enlistment office employees who detain men, pack them into buses, take them to the enlistment offices, and there force them to sign contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. Mass raids by enlistment officers in Penza began on June 18, and as local residents write, quote, "There are raids on the streets, roads are being blocked, patrols all over the city of Penza are catching men, grabbing them indiscriminately without checking documents, and they are also going around summer cottage areas." In Kamenka, nearly 100 people were crammed into a single bus, and according to reports from local residents, raids were also carried out in the city of Kuznetsk. Men are being detained on the streets, put into vehicles, and taken away to sign contracts. To do this, they are even stopping cars and city buses. Again, that's a quote from local chat groups. They're detaining everyone indiscriminately, stopping cars and public transport. Men are being rounded up and taken away to sign contracts. Raids are happening all over the city. On Thursday, let me remind you, a lot of military personnel was seen in Penza, and later a video was leaked online showing a group of women trying to rescue men who had been put into a minibus. It has been established that the video was filmed at the military enlistment office of the Oktyabrski and Zheleznodorozhny districts of the city of Penza.
Tell me, why not call an ambulance for a person who is feeling unwell? Tell me, why not call for help?
Tell me, why not call an ambulance for the person
Who is feeling unwell? Tell me.
Why?
Help is not.
Lesha, everything will be fine. I'm praying for you. I know.
Leshka.
I love you.
Guys! Guys, come on, tell me!
Everyone signed the contract voluntarily.
You were forced!
Tell me, were you forced? Were you beaten? Was it voluntary or not?
Just pray to God, don't cry, that's it.
That's it. Don't leave.
Lyoka! Close the door!
Can you give me 5 more minutes? Is that okay?
That's enough!
You could have done it like a human being. Like a human, you know. You beat them. We know what you've done. So how are you any better?
You!
You accept it, even if you don't admit it.
You can't even do that. You can't even give 5 minutes like a normal person.
You!
You shut up. We're giving everything. Come on, let's see how they're doing. Guys, come on, answer. You know.
That the rear didn't give. Take your hands off.
Goodbye. You should call the police right now.
Subtitles created by Dima Torzok.
Subtitles created by Dima Torzok. Subtitles created by Dima Torzok.
And now local residents are complaining that the Penza military enlistment office has imposed mobilization quotas, and all detained men are being forced to sign an allegedly voluntary contract with the Ministry of Defense. According to locals in the Sputnik City neighborhood, police are going door to door, pulling men out of their apartments and taking them for mobilization. Traffic police cars and several minibuses were also seen near the Sovremennik cinema in the center of Penza. They are blocking the road, they stop cars and simply take men away. And now, on social media, residents of Penza are asking where to run and, most importantly, how to run if the roads are already blocked. And this is just the first city. There are also reports of similar raids in other cities across Russia. That's why I'm sure that in the coming days we'll see more and more videos on social media showing mass forced mobilization in Russia. Well, this kind of behavior from the Kremlin can be explained by panic. Vladimir Putin is rushing to send as many men as possible off to war before he himself gets taken away. Right now, as we're recording this episode, more than 300 Ukrainian drones are flying over Russia again. And at the time of recording, it's already known that some of them have once again broken through Moscow's defense ring. But the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has remained publicly silent for more than a day, ignoring the strongest drone attack on Moscow and the Moscow region since the beginning of the war. As a result, according to Russian media reports, 17 people were injured, 1 child died, a drone flew into a residential building, 2 shopping centers caught fire in the capital, and there was an explosion at an oil refinery in Kapotnya. And yesterday we all saw how Russian air defense simply shoots down drones. But what's important is that it doesn't completely shoot them down in the air. It damages them and they fall onto residential buildings, shopping centers and so on. And this has been documented. It's clearly visible how a Ukrainian drone is flying and how a Russian air defense missile hits it. But the drone doesn't explode in the air, it just changes its trajectory and falls onto residential buildings, shopping centers, roads and so on.
Continuation.
Continuation. Where did it fly to?
To be continued, continuation.
Continuation.
Subtext.
On the day of the attack, when the sky over Moscow was covered with black smoke and oil-laced rain fell in the region, Vladimir Putin spent the day in Kazan at the ASEAN summit. In his speech, he talked about building a multipolar world, about trading in national currencies and so on, and he also laughed a lot at this forum. And after that, there was still no public reaction from Vladimir Putin to this raid. He decided to just remain silent and tell all Russians that nothing happened. The Ukrainian strikes on Moscow on June 18 revealed the weak points of Russian air defense. And the so-called Russian military bloggers, after the attacks, began openly criticizing censorship and the inability of the Russian authorities to protect the population from the consequences of the war. As the Institute for the Study of War writes, one Russian military blogger in his post, which was later for some reason deleted, stated that Ukrainian forces were able to inflict significant damage despite Moscow's highly effective air defense systems. And he emphasized that Ukraine is right now bringing the war into areas of the Russian Federation, far beyond the border regions. And that's why he calls for strengthening air defense around facilities across the country. But what can be done if there simply aren't enough of these air defense systems anymore? Another so-called Russian military blogger criticized Russian media for significantly downplaying the importance of these strikes in their publications. According to him, those who have become detached from the people control the state media and have created a false reality where everything is fine, urging them to report events accurately. In reality, not everything is fine. Another so-called Z military blogger added, he said that Russia needs to change its approach, otherwise official reports will become even more detached from reality than they are now. He once again criticized the state media for reporting on the so-called special military operation in a way that is far from reality, as if it only affected Ukraine and not Russia. And also for dismissing reports about Ukrainian movements on the battlefield as fake news. He says, guys, this war has long been in Russia. It's not in Ukraine. It's already in Russia. Also, stop lying about the supposed constant daily advances of the Russian army at the front. And now the Russian war correspondent noted that Russians can now see for themselves that the propagandist's claims that everything is going well do not correspond to reality. In Russia, by the way, I emphasize, not a single TV channel broadcasted or showed it. There wasn't any separate report at all about the strike on Moscow. No one. Everyone just kept silent and pretended that nothing happened. Instead, they mostly focused on the need to punish the Muscovites themselves, who filmed and posted videos of the strikes and their aftermath online. They're rounding up Muscovites, putting them in police vans and taking them to the detention center, like saying they shouldn't have done that. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, he proudly stated that despite everything, despite all these images from Moscow, the Russian air defense system is showing excellent results. Meanwhile, during the day on June 19th, footage appeared showing Ukrainian drones attacking Moscow again for the second day in a row. Local authorities regularly report on air defense activity over the capital of the Russian Federation. And now observers are already joking that Moscow's stability now means having drones in the sky, since Russians and Muscovites chose Vladimir Putin, who has brought the war to their homes. But in order to divert Russians' attention from the topic of attacks on Moscow and the topic of mobilization, the Kremlin decided to threaten Ukraine and Europe again. Like, yes, of course we have problems, but now we'll bring up, for example, the topic of a nuclear strike again. And all the Muscovites will howl again in a frenzy of pride, like, now we'll show you, now we'll take revenge for Moscow. Well, now we move on to the second part of the episode, where we'll discuss the prospects of negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine. There are some interesting points here that are definitely worth paying attention to. But friends, before we move on to the second part, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel and give it a like. And of course, leave any comment you want under this episode. This will really help promote the content on YouTube. I would be very grateful to you for that. Besides, friends, I've launched a private club called Peachy Insight. This is a separate private Telegram channel which is only accessible to my Patreon subscribers. There we discuss various topics together. I answer your questions. Moreover, I consult with you on which topic to choose for the next episode. So, if you want to join this kind of private club and discuss various news and topics with me, then subscribe to Patreon. The link is in this video's description, and there you'll get a link to that very private Telegram channel where you can take part in creating content for this YouTube channel. If you just want to support this YouTube channel financially with a one-time donation, there are also details and ways to do that in the description. I would really appreciate it. And follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and on my public Telegram channel. All the links are in the description of this video. Well, let's move on. Recently, Volodymyr Zelensky openly admitted that Ukraine's goal is to achieve a ceasefire on the front line by this winter, so it's necessary to increase pressure on Russia from all sides on all fronts. And today, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov stated that the countries of the European Union are making a big mistake by believing that dialogue with Russia should be built from a position of strength. This statement lays bare European diplomacy as a whole and what has been negotiated in Europe over the past month. And all of this was finalized when it was agreed upon with Trump, and Trump supported it. Next, I will provide information on how Moscow is reacting to all of this. So, Peskov makes a statement. This is the biggest mistake. Whether it comes from some incompetence, their being misinformed, or their stupidity, we don't know for sure, but that's a fact. Europe must understand the actual situation, especially in the Ukrainian conflict, to join the negotiations. Kyiv is in a very difficult situation, but it continues to stick to a course that is not aimed at negotiations. Meanwhile, the Kremlin press secretary said that talks with the aggressor country, Russia, allegedly achieved nothing when approached from a position of strength. And he also announced new strikes on targets in Ukraine. He said they will intensify attacks on Ukrainian civilian cities. At the same time, Peskov emphasized that Russia is supposedly ready for peaceful negotiations and noted that the Russian dictator has repeatedly stated Moscow's readiness for dialogue. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is also threatening to intensify strikes on Ukraine. Lavrov stated that European countries have presented Russia with an open and tough ultimatum on Ukraine, proposing that Moscow agree to an immediate ceasefire along the current front line and begin peace negotiations, and importantly, to compensate for the damage caused to Kyiv. And here, strangely enough, the Iranian model or Donald Trump's Iran deal can really help us, because it actually reflects what has been presented, is being proposed by Europe, Russia, and Ukraine to end the war. According to Lavrov, European countries are seeking a quick ceasefire, so that, and here I quote at length, to prevent the collapse of the armed forces of Ukraine at the front, to freeze the military conflict without addressing its root causes, and to deploy their own military contingents on the territory of Ukraine. A united Europe continues to dream of expansion, deliberately seeking to take over Ukraine. Ukraine and Moldova are being drawn into its orbit, as is Armenia. Ukraine is being considered as the strike force of the future unified European armed forces. Such a situation carries serious risks for global security, as a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia could quickly escalate into a nuclear exchange with catastrophic consequences. Well, basically, the Russians are once again resorting to threats of a nuclear strike. Lavrov also noted that the previous security model in Europe, which had been built over decades, was destroyed by European leaders. He claims that they are to blame. No, don't get me wrong, Europe is considering creating a single large European army. Not after Russia, this wild country, unleashed a full-scale, bloody, unprovoked war against Ukraine. No, not after that. Don't think this was unrelated to Russia. Are you saying Europe supposedly didn't have a reason, or what? So, Lavrov is trying to impose this kind of logic. That is, they are now completely turning everything upside down and saying that Europe itself had been planning this for a long time. It was Europe that wanted to use Ukraine as a strike force against Russia, and that's exactly why Europe is pumping Ukraine with weapons. I emphasize for Russians that Ukrainians are a reasonable nation. They understand this perfectly well already. For Russians, who are a bit dim and uncivilized, let me point out that, look, before 2014, Europe was buying gas and oil from Russia and trading with them. Angela Merkel used to visit, hug Vladimir Putin, everything was fine. After 2014, when Russia attacked Ukraine, in Crimea and Donbass, Europe started turning away from Russia. After 2022, when Vladimir Putin unleashed a bloody full-scale war in Europe, Europe started thinking, listen, we need to, as they say, show our teeth to these unwashed Russians. We need to arm ourselves. We need to prepare for a big war. We need to strengthen our defense. We need to build a huge army. We need to expand the military-industrial complex. We need to do everything so that these Russians are simply afraid to even look in the direction of Europe. What do you think of that cause and effect chain? So then Lavrov called for the creation of a kind of common pan-continental security architecture open to all countries of Eurasia, reflecting the multipolar realities of today. What they mean is basically let Russia have its own sphere of influence. Like, why is Europe suddenly starting to build relations with Armenia? No, this is our domain. Why is Europe, for example, building relations with Ukraine and Moldova? Moscow says, this is our territory, don't you dare come here. This is what Russians are proposing when they talk about a multipolar world. Here, it's clear that Europe has begun pressuring the Kremlin with ultimatums. The Economist writes that Ukraine, the US, and Europe have stated that a proposal for a peaceful settlement in Ukraine may include a phased plan, possibly similar to the one that Donald Trump has just agreed on with Iran. And so, as The Economist writes, the failures of the Russian army at the front, and there are some, no matter what Vladimir Putin says, and Ukraine's success in striking Russia with drones, hitting its supply routes and targets inside Russia, has begun to change Donald Trump's attitude toward the course of the Russia-Ukraine war. Representatives of Kiev and its team are now holding daily consultations on how to force Russia to come to the negotiating table. And the intensification of massive attacks on Russian territory, as it turned out, is one of the ways to put pressure on the Kremlin, which has been supported by both Europe and the United States of America. One of the options being discussed for how the war in Ukraine should end is to finish the war in 2 months, 2 stages. These 2 stages are very similar to what the US and Iran signed. First, it is proposed to cease hostilities along the current front line, extending 50 to 70 kilometers deep on each side. That is, the idea is to first create such a zone, let's say, with a width of more than 100 kilometers along the front line, where shelling stops. Then, if this remains stable, a broader agreement on a complete ceasefire and an end to the war. And according to The Economist, unofficial negotiations with Moscow have resumed, and now there are insider reports that Russia wants to stall until October, in order to then urgently provide support to Donald Trump before the midterm elections to Congress, which will take place in November, and get something in return. So, in other words, the Kremlin might agree to a partial ceasefire sometime in October as a gift to Donald Trump before the elections, but in return, they will demand pressure on Ukraine. In Moscow, they continue to insist that they are only ready for negotiations in the spirit of Anchorage. Well, considering that at the meeting in August 2025 in Alaska, Vladimir Putin allegedly reached an agreement with Donald Trump on handing over the entire Donbass to Russia and recognizing both de jure and de facto control over Crimea and the occupied territories of the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Whether this is actually true and whether Trump and Putin really agreed on this, no one knows. But Russians continue to claim that such agreements were allegedly reached, even though Trump has already publicly denied them. And I'll finish this episode with a quote from The Economist. But the mood is changing in the White House, whose occupant last year said that Volodymyr Zelensky has no cards left to continue the war. 2 Ukrainian points of view are beginning to take root in Washington. That Russia cannot be trusted and that Ukraine is a winner, not a loser. This was confirmed by the successful Ukrainian strike on the Moscow oil refinery in Kapotnya on the morning of June 18 as the G7 leaders summit was concluding in Evian, France. And everyone, including Donald Trump and the G7 summit participants, saw those images of Moscow in flames. I'll leave it at that. Friends, please subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, give a like, and let me know in the comments what you think about this format of episodes on this YouTube channel. I want to adjust the editorial policy of this channel a bit. There will be 2 or 3 longer videos per day instead of 4 or 5. And short ones, each on a separate topic. In general, let me know your opinion about this format. And once again, if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you already know what to do. All the links and details are in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.